"I married you only because you're the boss's daughter," grinned my husband Oliver. I had to hit him back with reality to prove to him how wrong he was, as I lay ill in bed and saw the scarves and gloves I had meticulously knitted for him thrown out without a second thought. I laughed at the very concept of his awareness, whether he felt he was winning this or that. Oliver and I have been married for 5 years under the name Stacy Morgan. Despite not having kids, we've been living a happy life together. Oliver is a workaholic who is frequently gone from home, and occasionally I am lonely. But his commitment to spending time with us on his days off helps to make the loneliness tolerable. Oliver's first boss was my father, who introduced us to one another. I think one of the biggest reasons I was a stay-at-home wife was Oliver's suggestion. Thank goodness I had some alone time. I started sewing, worked out, and got along with the neighbors as I helped Oliver. I experimented with a lot of different activities to try to fill the hole, but sewing and knitting were my favorite. I used to buy Oliver gloves and scarves every winter. Oliver commented that my first ones were just as nice as ones you purchase from a store, even though they were created poorly at first. I improved every year after that. After hearing my husband's encouraging remarks, I grew to love sewing. "I want to sew with you when we have a child one day." Oliver smiled and remarked, "Maybe I'll join in and learn when the time comes," when I told him this. Of course, I always give my husband my full support, take care of the house, and put our time together first when he's off. I must have appeared to have a rather fortunate existence from the outside, looking in, because of his large salary. I thought vaguely that I would continue to live peacefully with my loving husband and our future child, so I had no complaints about such a life. But around 2 years ago, the first glimmer of a shadow over this tranquil existence emerged. As usual, I was waiting for Oliver to get home when I got lightheaded and passed out. My husband drove me to the hospital when he got back from work. I woke up and discovered that I was in a hospital bed. Oliver and the doctor discussed how severe my symptoms were and how they appeared to be something I would always have to cope with. Though fortunately not a direct danger to my life, it might yet occur. It was advised that I remain in the hospital until my body healed a little under these conditions. Oliver comforted me after noticing my anxiety, saying, "It looks like you'll be hospitalized for a while, but it's all right. When I have some free time from work, I'll come visit you. Together, we can overcome this." As he spoke these words and held my hand, I felt less nervous. Having my loving spouse at my side, I thought everything would work out, even though I had no reason to think that way. Oliver kept his word and has been seeing me nearly every day ever then. He inquired how I was doing while holding my hand. He would bring me my favorite sewing supplies, and we would stitch together while talking about insignificant things that happened that day if I stated that my days at the hospital were dull. It was very enjoyable to spend time teaching my clumsy husband how to sew, and every time we did it, I was able to put my boredom aside. But these enjoyable periods in the hospital were short-lived, about a year. My husband's annual visits decreased once I gave him the custom of a hand-knitted scarf. It is now okay for him to reveal his face once every several weeks. Initially, I assumed my spouse was preoccupied with work and carried on with my sewing, intending to present him with a completed item when he returned. I figured I would offer him some gloves since, according to the doctor, I was informed I would be out by the end of the year. Then, in an attempt to make up for our time away, I gave the gloves my whole emotional support. But after a long time, my husband eventually paid me a visit. He regarded the gloves I gave him icily and said, "Are you still manufacturing these? To be honest, it's a new annoyance." Then he handed me a divorce document along with a scarf I had laboriously knitted for him. The scarf I had spent so much time crafting last year was as immaculate as it had been when I gave it to him. Have you been in the hospital over the past 2 years? I can't keep taking care of you, but I heard you'll be released shortly, he said. We ought to part ways. I looked down at the divorce decree. Oliver had already signed the documents when he heard these remarks. It has come to this, I thought, seeing that. Since he stopped coming, to be honest, I had given this idea a lot of thought. I even attempted to talk myself out of that idea by telling myself that he was just preoccupied with his job, but I knew that Oliver would never abandon me. Had his workload truly increased, he would have informed me. When he suddenly stopped showing up without warning, I had a sense this was how things were going to work out. That's why I was able to politely inquire as to why he desired a divorce. Oliver was undoubtedly being burdened by me, so I wasn't attempting to hold on to him. I suppose I had no option if the nice Oliver I knew declared his desire for a divorce. However, Oliver was the one who assured me that we would work through this together, so I was a little perplexed as to why he had changed his mind. Oliver answered my slightly perplexed query. Isn't it obvious? All I've had since I got married to you is problems. You send me scarves and gloves every year, and I'm so over it. Your sole reason for marriage is that you are the boss's daughter. On top of everything else, how am I supposed to handle you becoming sick? He looked to be making fun of me when he laughed at me. He told me that he was tired of dealing with me, who had been innocently enjoying our life together. Every time I talked about happiness, love, or loneliness, it seemed he thought I was a fool for it. Who can even wear a handmade scarf without feeling embarrassed nowadays? Receiving such things is a nuisance and annoying. When I looked at Oliver's neck as he was talking, I saw a high-end scarf that I didn't remember giving him. Certainly, when compared to the scarf I made, it was of superior quality, and there was no need to compare which was better. I wondered if he had never used any of the items I'd given him until now. He must have been irritated by them all along, and I just wasn't aware. After I was hospitalized, my father retired soon after and was no longer at the company. Hence, Oliver didn't have to be considerate toward me anymore. If his wife was ill, it would provide a convenient excuse at work. Furthermore, for the first year, he made a show of visiting me in between his work. I could imagine my father, prior to his retirement, often speaking about this at work, portraying my husband as a good man who works hard while caring for his ill wife. It was obvious that he had established this persona and was well regarded by his colleagues. That was what he wanted, and it seems the value he saw in me was realized when I felt ill. When I voiced these thoughts, my husband looked surprised and confessed, "Well, it did make work easier. When I spoke about you, everyone was sympathetic and treated me nicely. If I worked a little overtime, I was praised for being diligent and responsible. If I wanted to take a break, all I had to say was, 'My wife is,' and that was it." He admitted this without any sign of remorse. He had skillfully used my situation to his advantage in ways I wasn't aware of. As for my name, I'm up for the next promotion. I mean, they're all idiots, but I have to thank your illness for that," he continued. As I listened to him with my eyes downcast, I lifted my gaze after he finished talking. What I saw was an ugly grin, and the man I loved was nowhere to be found. I understood that this was his true nature. Well, if I could be of help, that's good. We probably won't see each other again, so take care," I simply said and handed back the divorce papers. He had no use for me after receiving them and quickly turned on his heel to leave. Thus, our divorce was finalized, and I quietly wept. After some time, I was discharged from the hospital and returned home with my parents. When my father heard about what had happened, he raised his voice. I never thought he would be that kind of guy, he said. But to me, it didn't matter anymore. I calmed my father down and told him that I wanted to move back to my parents' home. Once I finished tidying up the house, my parents were understanding and told me to do what made me happy. For now, I decided to live with my parents. Before that, though, I decided to visit the house where I had lived with my husband. However, a problem arose. The front door lock wasn't working. Confused, my parents and I looked at each other and decided to ring the doorbell, only to be greeted by a stranger. To my bewilderment, I asked him about the situation, and he said he had bought the house a little while ago. It seemed he had been living there for a few months already and appeared to be happily living with his wife and child. My parents' anger only grew with this revelation, but I chose not to disturb the new family. I bowed my head and quietly left. However, I couldn't just let things be, so I immediately contacted my husband. He casually responded on the phone, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital, and keeping the sales money is compensation. It was my house to begin with, so you have no complaints, right?" I couldn't help but let out a sigh at his nonchalant words. I wished he could have told me sooner. From what I gathered from the new owner, the house had been sold quite a while ago. My husband probably put it up for sale about a year ago, around the time he stopped showing. Not even if he intended to divorce me at that point, selling the house without any discussion was just outrageous. Our divorce had already been finalized with the submission of our signed divorce papers. However, since I was in the hospital, we had agreed to discuss compensation and asset division after my discharge. We had planned a meeting for next week, but my husband had taken action on his own, which was just unbelievable. What was even more troubling was that my husband didn't seem to think he had done anything wrong. That's why I told him calmly over the phone, "You really don't know anything, do you?" "Huh? What do you mean?" he asked, sounding puzzled, to which I responded, "I'll explain in detail next week," and then I hung up. I smiled at my worried parents and told my father I had a favor to ask. I shared my thoughts with him and asked him to prepare for what was to come. "I see. I've got it all prepared, the necessary documents. The discussion is next week, so there's not much time, but we'll manage somehow," my father said, offering a slightly troubled smile. As a father, he probably feels some guilt for recommending my husband to me. His anger at my husband seemed to fuel him to do whatever he could. I thanked my father and waited for the day of our discussion, imagining my husband's face at that time. It brought a smile to my face for the first time in a while. With my father's help, I prepared for the meeting. The place we chose for our discussion was at my family's home. My parents and I sat in a line, with my husband sitting alone across from us. Surely he knew that my parents were injured by the divorce, but he didn't seem to care anymore. He probably thought there was no longer a need to be mindful of my parents. His composure was unshaken. Even a hint of a smile was visible on his face. His demeanor was nothing short of insolent. "I'm the victim here. However, I don't intend to demand too much. The proceeds from the sale of the house will suffice," he said. His words conveyed a sense of magnanimity, as if he was making the compromise. Seeing his attitude, my father's face turned crimson, but I gently placed my hand on his, trying to calm him down. In this discussion, the one who would be at a disadvantage is not us, but my husband. Knowing this, there was no need for us to be unnecessarily upset. "There's something important we need to discuss first," I said. As I spoke, my father presented a document. It was a paper proving that the land on which my husband sold the house stood was owned by my father. Indeed, the house was in your name. There's no disputing that. However, the land on which the house stands is my father's property, and he still holds the title to it. That should be clear from this document." Upon hearing my words, my husband slightly furrowed his brow. So what? The house was mine regardless. No one has the right to complain. Do you think you can retaliate against me with that? He chuckled, as if he found the situation ridiculous. It's true that even if the land title was in my father's name, there's no problem with the sale of the house as long as the house is under my husband's name. I continued, my husband must have looked into this matter before selling the house, and indeed there were no legal issues with his actions. However, this is only from a legal perspective. For the family that bought the house, this would create a significant issue. You sold the house, didn't you? But considering we have the rights to the land, my father can demand rent from the family living there. Won't that cause some trouble? I asked. The situation is different from what they were told. Neither my father nor I intend to take such a course of action. However, that does not mean we are willing to relinquish the rights to our land for nothing. In that case, the action we would take is to sell the land to the family. We wouldn't go so far as to ask them to leave, nor do we plan on charging monthly rent. But naturally, it would be problematic for us if they did not purchase the land. Originally, that land was something my father had gifted us to live on, not to be freely given away to strangers. If that happens, I hear the family who bought the house could sue you. Because, as I said earlier, the deal was not as they had been told. Imagine the frustration they feel finally buying their dream house, only to learn the land is owned by someone else, and they now have more expenses. After obtaining the proof of my father's land ownership, we immediately went to that family. Once we explained the situation, they were understanding. They reasoned that if there's any trouble, it's the seller's responsibility. Therefore, if the negotiations here don't go well, they would end up suing my husband. Seeing my husband's face turn pale, I could tell he understood my point. He seemed to realize that no matter what, he would incur a significant amount of money due to his mistake. In a trembling voice, he asked, "What should I do then?" I smiled and responded that the family could purchase the land from us and consolidate the ownership. Then you could make up for that amount. This would settle everything smoothly. In this scenario, the family won't have to unnecessarily sue my husband. If the family becomes the owners of both the house and land, all the current issues will be resolved. Of course, they weren't informed about the land price when they bought the house, so they will likely charge my husband for it. But that's not their family's problem. The issue would be that, because the land is in a prime location, the cost of the land could be higher than the sale price of the house. Even if my husband gives up all his assets, it won't be enough. In the end, he won't have a penny left to his name. Or you could buy back the house and then pay for the land. Of course, you'd have to pay the family a relocation fee. In this case, both the land and house would return to my husband's possession. He could then sell them again, which could give him some money. However, considering the relocation fee, there's a low chance that my husband will end up with any money. Whichever option he chooses, my husband will be at a loss. Also about alimony, I've been mentally distressed by your actions. I plan to claim compensation for that, so keep that in mind. All this time, my husband, Oliver, used me as a pawn in his pursuit of promotion at work. Now that I know this, I am repulsed by everything Oliver did for me in the past, and I plan to file for damages due to emotional distress because of it. Though evidence is scarce, and it's not very likely that I will win, just discussing this matter is significant given Oliver's current circumstances. Oliver, trapped, might not have the time to go through these options. Anything I've just said might come to pass. My father adds, hoping to silence Oliver even more. I have a lot of acquaintances, even though I'm retired and no longer work for the company. Lately, I've been talking to my old subordinates a lot. They've been telling me what you did and what you thought of my kid. Oliver, everyone has been staring down on you. Oliver finally understands what he's in when my father cheerfully breaks the news to him. He no longer has control over the prestige he acquired inside the firm by utilizing me or the money he made by selling the property without my permission. Let's talk about what happens next now. Now that you are aware of your situation, we need to make decisions on the house, compensation, and the division of property. Smiling and putting my hands together, I say, I was definitely grinning more than I have since our breakup, and my smile isn't the same as the ones I've previously given Oliver. I hope you understand to the fullest that decisions about your assets will be made during this very meeting. Oliver, drawn in by my words, could do nothing but chuckle through tears. After that, I won the discussions, and Oliver promised to provide me alimony. Oliver was also supposed to pay for the property on which the house is located. This was eventually clarified to the family that purchased our home. Oliver lost everything as a result, while everyone else profited from these conversations. Oliver lost his status in the firm as a result of the gossip my father started spreading, and higher management voiced worries that caused Oliver's possible advancement to be postponed. Oliver was unable to fit in as a result of the story's persistent propagation, and my father soon told me that Oliver had quit. All of it, I would say, was karma, but given someone's motives, items obtained by exploitation can disappear quickly. Oliver just thought he had succeeded in setting a trap. For my part, I teach sewing and presently reside at my parents' home. Although my lessons aren't very full, students like my neighbors' wives and children have helped me make a respectable living. As I once told Oliver, I couldn't make it work with my own kids, but I've since come to understand that enjoyment does come from sharing the things I love with other people.